The first time I saw the wreckage of Flight 913 was through the lens of a faded photograph. I'd found it in a dusty archival box, tucked away beneath years' worth of bureaucratic file folders inside the Aeronautica Nacional in Rio. The black and white image captured a twisted aircraft half submerged in the murky waters of a rainforest river. Wooden fragments of what appeared to be fuselage and seats drifted downstream like dying dreams flecked by floating leaves. My breath caught. My pulse raced. The moment felt impossibly familiar. I shouldn't have known it. I didn't. Flight 913 had never existed, at least not in official records. The registry held no trace of a national flight with that number. There was no disappearance noted, no missing passengers, no emergency call, nothing. Yet there it was, in that photograph placed atop a stack of unmarked manila folders. Beneath it lay a weathered leather journal, its cover creased by water damage and time. Inside was a name, Miguel Suarez, identified as pilot in command, and a date, July 12, 1975. I had come to Brazil on assignment as an aviation correspondent, chasing truth in cold reports and missing flight logs. But I never expected to be handed a key to something so impossibly hidden. And yet, this photograph, this diary, screamed that someone had tried to preserve the truth. Someone who never wanted the world to forget the horror that happened that night in the jungle. By midday, I was trekking into the dark heart of the Amazon, guided by old maps and rare satellite images that hinted at a crash site. My translator scientist friend Anna Meyer walked beside me, documenting each step with a trembling hand. She used to say that the forest held secrets, not to be found, but to be unearthed, carefully, with grief and respect. We passed dense underbrush, curious howls, and rivers flooded with tannin-stained water. I clutched Suarez's journal in my rucksack, fearful of the words it contained, and yet craving them as desperately as I needed air. Then we arrived. The wreckage was real and silent. A wing protruded from mud, bare metal glinting with neath incomprehensible designs of rust. A seat frame, mangled, bore grooves worn by vines and time. And there, next to an open panel in the fuselage, lay a small, cloth-bound journal, miraculously intact. It was Miguel's diary. I knelt down, reverent. The environment swallowed sound. In the distance, a lone bird called, and it felt like a benediction. I opened the diary. Miguel's voice, shaky, fearful, resolute, spilled out in Portuguese and broken English. He wrote of uncharted storms, a sudden loss of instruments, a descent into darkness, and something else. He whispered of waking up in that wreckage, not as a victim, but as a messenger. He spoke of overheard conversations, men arguing about erasure, orders to disavow Flight 913, threats to anyone who knew the truth. His final entries were unreadable, smudged ink, tears, perhaps blood. The last words, clear and tragic: "If I do not come out, for God's sake, show them my diary." I pocketed the journal. We didn't sleep there. We left with a silent promise. This was gravity. This was why I had come to Brazil, not to chase cold facts, but to expose a secret buried underneath moss, silence, and official lies. And this was just the beginning. The flight manifest was missing. That was the first thing Anna confirmed after we returned to Rio. Despite scouring the regional archives, national databases, and even the international aviation records, Flight 913 appeared nowhere. No departure logs, no maintenance reports, no records of passengers. It was as if the aircraft had been born, lived, and died in total secrecy. But Miguel's journal said otherwise. His entries were specific, painfully detailed, almost too vivid to be fiction. He listed 28 souls on board: a schoolteacher, a retired general, a businessman, and his pregnant wife. People with names, faces, and destinations. "They trusted me," he had written, "and I flew them straight into the void." I spent hours translating the diary, line by line, Miguel wrote like a man at the edge of himself, someone holding on to sanity by the sheer force of his conscience. After the crash, he wandered the wreckage, delirious with fever. For days, he believed he was the only survivor. Until he heard voices in the trees. He described them as whispers at first, soft, like the forest itself was talking, then clearer, human, familiar, survivors. But they were not calling for help. They were speaking in hushed tones, arguing, afraid. Miguel followed them, crawling through the underbrush until he reached a clearing illuminated by moonlight. He saw 5 men, dressed in flight suits and cargo vests, sitting around a fire they had built from stripped insulation and seat cushions. They had supplies, maps, even a shortwave radio. One of them held a folder stamped with military insignia. Miguel didn't move. He listened. And what he heard broke him. The flight had never been meant to reach its destination. According to what these men said, Flight 913 was part of a classified operation, something called Progetto Vortice. The passengers had been hand-picked, each of them either connected to political dissent, whistleblower activity, or sensitive knowledge from the regime. The plane was to disappear, the wreckage swallowed by jungle, the truth never to surface. But something had gone wrong. The pilot, Miguel, was not supposed to survive. And now, having overheard them, he was a threat. That night he tried to flee. He wrote of running for hours, guided only by starlight and sheer panic. He fell, he bled, he passed out. Days later, he awoke back in the wreckage, alone again. His writing deteriorated after that. The sentences became shorter, more erratic. He described hallucinations, shadows moving without sources, trees whispering secrets he wasn't meant to know. Once he claimed he saw the passengers, alive and well, boarding another plane in the sky, as if time itself had cracked open and repeated. He questioned his sanity, but one line chilled me more than all the others. They are watching me. Not just from the forest, but from above, from the sky. And I don't think they're human. I paused reading there. I needed air. The deeper I went into the journal, the less it felt like I was reading a survivor's testimony, and more like I was decoding the final messages of a man who had seen too much. And yet, the events matched certain obscure reports, unsolved disappearances in the region, unexplained signals intercepted by amateur radio operators, and even a strange meteorological anomaly recorded over northern Brazil the same day Flight 913 went missing. Ina, who had remained skeptical up to this point, started to change. She found satellite images from the 70s, blurry, barely usable, but one showed a shadowed shape in the river, in the same location we found the wreck. Another, taken just a week later, showed nothing. No wreckage, no debris, as if the river had swallowed it whole. But we had seen it, touched it, photographed it. We weren't hallucinating. Then came the phone call. It was past midnight when my hotel room phone rang. I answered, half asleep. A voice, flat, male, robotic, said only one sentence in English: "The diary must return to the forest." Then the line went dead. I checked the room door, locked, checked the hallway, empty. When I returned to the desk, the diary was still there, but one page was missing, the last one. Miguel's final message. Panic swelled in my chest. I woke Anna. We scoured the room. Nothing. No signs of break-in. No paper in the trash. No clue how it vanished. Only one page, torn so cleanly it must have been done with a blade. "They knew we took it," Anna said, "and they came for it. But who? Government agents? Soldiers? Something else?" The next morning, we left Rio. We drove hours south into smaller towns, following old military flight paths we'd found in a half-burned training manual Miguel had referenced. We stopped in a remote village where a mechanic remembered a plane landing decades ago, unregistered at night. It stayed for hours, then disappeared. No one was allowed near it. The military said it was agricultural, but the mechanic swore it bore no crop dusters, only black windows. That was when Anna said something I hadn't dared voice. "What if they weren't trying to erase Flight 913, she whispered. "What if they were trying to keep something it carried contained?" We were no longer investigating a crash. We were chasing a containment breach. And Miguel, whether mad or not, had left a message the world was never meant to hear. Now, we were the only ones who knew it existed, and someone was making sure it never surfaced. We didn't sleep for 3 nights after the page went missing. I kept the diary locked in a fireproof case, wrapped in cloth, then stored at the bottom of my backpack. I wore it at all times, even in the shower. Anna took to sleeping in bursts, her ears constantly alert to phantom footsteps in the hallway. Paranoia was no longer irrational. It was practical. We were being watched. We knew that now. The missing page haunted me. The final words of a man who had seen beyond the veil of secrecy, who had heard whispers in the jungle and documented forbidden knowledge. Without that page, the diary was incomplete, his message unfinished. It wasn't just about a crash. It was about a plan, and perhaps a warning. We needed help. I contacted someone I hadn't spoken to in years. His name was Lucas Brandão, a former aviation investigator turned recluse. He had once worked with the Departamento de Controle do Espaço Aéreo, the Brazilian Airspace Control Bureau, until he abruptly quit in 1984, following a classified radar incident over Acre. He had since vanished into private research, and last I heard, he was living alone in a cabin outside São José dos Ausentes. Anna and I rented a jeep and drove the mountainous roads until we found him. Lucas didn't answer the door at first, but when I shouted Flight 913, he opened it with trembling hands. He had grown older, with deep lines across his face and eyes that looked like they had seen too much. When we showed him Miguel's journal, he didn't speak for a full 5 minutes. Then he poured a glass of cachaça, drank it in one motion, and said only 2 words. "It's real." We stayed with him for 3 days. Lucas explained what no one else could. He had seen the original flight plan, not on public records, but in an internal dispatch years ago. Flight 913 was part of a covert experiment during the height of Brazil's military dictatorship. A test flight disguised as a commercial route. The objective, according to Lucas, had been to test a piece of recovered technology, something unearthed in Serra do Roncador, a mountain range long rumored to host vortexes and magnetic anomalies. The plane carried a device, not Brazilian, not American, not anything they could explain. Its purpose was unclear, but it affected instruments, time, sound, thought. The project was aborted when the plane vanished. Miguel's diary confirmed what Lucas had always suspected. The experiment had not failed. It had worked, just not in the way they had planned. Lucas took us to his underground archives, a labyrinth of old files, tapes, maps, and photographs. He showed us a blurry black and white image taken by a weather satellite in July 1975. It showed a distortion in the upper atmosphere over the Amazon, a spiral, like an eye. Right below it, the flight path of 913. He played a recording next. It was garbled, hard to understand, but one line was clear. A voice, desperate, male, calling out, "São José Tower, we are seeing double. I repeat, 2 of everything. The sky is wrong," before static cut it off. That voice wasn't Miguel's. It belonged to the co-pilot, a man named Hugo Mendes. Lucas had traced Hugo's identity years ago and found a dead end. No obituary, no family, no trace. But 2 weeks after the crash, a man matching his description had checked into a hospital in Bolivia under a different name. He died of neurological deterioration, according to the report. His brain had shown signs of rapid aging, as if he had lived decades in days. Time distortion. Lucas believed the device on board Flight 913 was not just a source of energy or navigation disruption. It was a gateway, a door to something else, another plane of existence, a field of manipulated space-time. The forest had not just swallowed the wreckage, It had buried a wound in reality, but someone knew, and someone was covering it up. Lucas warned us that the missing page of the diary wasn't just stolen, it was classified. Whoever took it had access to systems we couldn't imagine. That meant there were still people protecting Progetto Vortici, or reviving it. Anna asked the question that had been burning in both our minds. If the technology was so dangerous, why test it on civilians? Lucas answered without hesitation. Because no one would miss them. We left San Jose the next morning, carrying photocopies of the documents Lucas allowed us to take. We knew what we had to do next. We needed to find out who Miguel really was. Not the pilot, but the man. His background, his connections, his silence. Back in Rio, Anna found an old newspaper article in an obscure municipal archive. A plane crash, described only as an unauthorized private aircraft, had occurred in 1968. The same Miguel Suarez was listed as the pilot. No survivors, no investigation, just a brief mention buried between two election stories. But Miguel had survived. Again. The article listed his age at the time, 27. That meant that in 1975 he would have been 34. Too young. The man in the journal had described things with a kind of weary detail that didn't match his supposed age. He had written like a man in his 60s, like someone who had seen decades of classified secrets and government betrayal. What if Miguel hadn't aged normally? What if the device on Flight 913 hadn't just distorted time during the crash, but had altered everyone exposed to it? And then Anna discovered something else. A photograph from 1999, taken at a protest outside the Ministry of Defense. In the background, barely visible, a man standing at the edge of the crowd, thin, graying hair, holding a small sign that read, "Flight 913 was never lost." The man's face? Miguel Suarez, still alive, still watching, and we weren't just chasing a crash anymore. We were chasing the man who survived it. Miguel Suarez was supposed to be dead. Officially, his name had not appeared in any public record past 1976. No bank account, no legal document, no hospital visit, nothing. But there he was, unmistakable, in the corner of a photo from a 1999 protest in Brasilia. Older, gaunter, but with the same heavy-lidded stare, the same squared jaw. He had not aged normally, but he had aged. That meant he had escaped whatever force had claimed Flight 913, and more incredibly, he had stayed in Brazil. Anna and I returned to Rio with a renewed urgency. We digitized the image, ran it through basic facial recognition tools. Nothing official came back, but one result stood out. A similar face appeared in a low-resolution video uploaded in 2010 to a now-defunct conspiracy forum. The video, filmed at night in a candlelit room, showed a man reading from a stack of papers. His voice was hoarse. The image was blurry, but the cadence, the rhythm, the way he paused before each sentence matched the diary perfectly. It was him. The video was titled, "They're Still Flying It?" That phrase stuck with me, like an accusation, like a secret dared to be spoken. In the video, Miguel, or the man we now believed was him, spoke of a second Flight 913. Not the one that crashed in 1975, but another, rebuilt in secret, perhaps even using the original wreckage. He claimed it was still operational, flying under different call signs, testing continuum tiers in unregistered airspace over the Amazon, Patagonia, and even Antarctica. They never buried it, he said. They hid it, and they're still sending people inside. We needed to find him. Anna tracked the uploader of the video to a small cybercafe chain in Recife. The account had been created there years ago by someone using the alias Viajante 913. When we visited the cafe, the staff had no recollection of him, but the IP logs showed that the last access had come from a public computer in a university library, Universidade Federal de Pernambuco. It was Anna's idea to pose as journalists researching Cold War-era aviation projects. It worked. A librarian guided us to the restricted collection, where we found a single, fragile book catalogued under Temas Esotéricos, Gobierno e Transporte. The book was handwritten, bound in leather and completely anonymous, but the first page had a title etched with a trembling hand: Echo Flight, the Second Journey of 913. The book read like a confession. Its author, never identified, claimed to be a mechanic hired in 1986 to work on a military aircraft stored in an underground hangar in Goiás. The craft, he said, was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Civilian in appearance, but reinforced with alloys not found in any Brazilian manufacturing database. It bore no registration number, but the frame had been partially reconstructed around a strange cylindrical object that no one was allowed to touch. The core, they called it, wrapped in lead, humming faintly at night. The mechanic wrote that some nights the plane would vanish, not fly, vanish. The security footage always glitched, and when it returned, it smelled like burnt ozone. One morning he found a pilot inside, unconscious, muttering in a language he couldn't understand. The pilot's name tag read S. Mendonça. He was never seen again. The more we read, the more it became clear. The Brazilian government, or some black-winged entity above it, had kept the technology from Flight 913 alive. They had built a new vessel, reconstructed the anomalies, and began using it for tests. Into where or when it went, no one could say, but the mechanic's last entry was the most damning. "They're no longer in control," he wrote. "The plane flies itself." Anna closed the book, her hands trembling. "This is a machine that remembers," she said. "That remembers what happened to the original crew, the passengers, maybe even Miguel." I couldn't argue. We left the library in silence. That night, back in the hotel, I played the video of Miguel again, this time listening closely to the background noise. Between his sentences, during the silences, there was a faint clicking, rhythmic, not mechanical, human, like Morse code. Anna and I isolated the sound and transcribed it. It repeated the same phrase over and over. Refugio Azul, Lat 7923, Lon 52.812. A set of coordinates. Deep in the jungle, hours from any known flight path. The next morning we chartered a helicopter. The pilot, a veteran named Geraldo, was hesitant. He'd flown over that region once, he said, and saw something he couldn't explain, a shimmer in the air. His compass spun in circles, his radio went silent. He'd refused to return ever since. But we offered double. He agreed, reluctantly. We flew for 4 hours. When we reached the coordinates, Geraldo went pale. Below us was a clearing. In its center stood a rusted hangar, swallowed partially by vines and time. The structure was crumpled like it had been dropped from the sky, but inside, barely visible through the broken roof, was a plane. White, cylindrical, wingless. It pulsed. We circled once, twice, then Geraldo refused to go lower. "I'm not dying for this," he said. "You want answers? You'll walk." He landed a kilometer away. We hiked the rest of the way. As we approached the hangar, Anna gripped my arm. "I see someone," she whispered. A figure stood in the doorway, thin, gray-haired. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He just waited. And as we drew closer, I knew it was him. Miguel Suarez, the man the world had buried in the jungle, still alive, still guarding the truth. And what he would tell us next would either unravel everything or doom us to the same silence he had endured for decades. Miguel Suarez didn't look surprised to see us. There was no fear in his posture, no urgency in his movements. He stood beneath the rusted arch of the hangar's broken entrance, framed by the thick vines that had woven through the metal like veins. His face was older than any of the photos suggested, leathery and hollowed by decades of sun, solitude, and secrets, but his eyes were sharp, watchful. A man who had waited years for someone to find him and wasn't entirely convinced we weren't a hallucination. He raised a hand, not in greeting, but in warning. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice rough like sandpaper soaked in rain. "They see everything once you step this far. We're not with them." I said quickly, stepping forward. "We found your journal, the diary. We've read everything." Miguel flinched at the word diary, as if it were a ghost he'd long since buried. "So, they took the last page," he knew. I pulled the journal from my bag, held it out. It was missing when we woke up. They knew where we were. They were watching. Miguel didn't touch it, he only nodded. That page was never meant to be read. Not by the world, not even by me. It was written while I was in between. "In between what?" Anna asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned and walked deeper into the hangar, beckoning us to follow. Inside, the air was heavy with mildew, rot, and the faint metallic tang of oxidized fuel. The structure had caved in at the center, but the object, the vessel, stood untouched beneath a patch of skylight. It wasn't an airplane, not in the traditional sense. There were no wings, no windows, no tail fin, just a long silver tube the size of a commuter jet, humming faintly, its surface impossibly smooth. It was pulsing, breathing, alive. "This is not the original aircraft," Miguel said. "This is what came back." He circled it slowly, hand grazing the edge without contact. After the crash, after the screams and the silence, something opened. A fold, a tear. I don't know how to explain it. One moment I was lying in twisted wreckage, the next I was somewhere else. No time, no sound, just thought, memory, regret. He turned to us. "They showed me everything. Who they were, I can't say. Not human, not like us. They wore us like clothing. They spoke in images. And they asked me a question I still don't understand." "What did they ask?" Anna said softly. "Which version do you choose to keep?" The air went cold. Miguel continued. "I think they were trying to repair something. Reality, a loop, maybe a mistake made long before we ever flew. They sent me back, alone. The others didn't return the same." I exchanged a look with Anna. "But your crew survived?" He nodded. "Some did, physically, but their minds weren't theirs. They spoke like echoes. They repeated the same phrases over and over. One of them, Mendonça, said he remembered every version of the flight, crashes, landings, hijackings, versions where we never boarded, where we died before takeoff, all at once. And then what happened? They died, one by one. Some aged to dust in days, others screamed for weeks before going silent. I buried them in this jungle, but I knew if I left, if I tried to tell someone, they would erase me too." He sat on a crate, exhausted by the memory. "But you tried, didn't you?" I asked. "The protest, the video, you wanted someone to know." "I wanted them to listen, but no one did." Anna stepped toward the vessel. "What is it doing now?" Miguel looked up, his face hardening. "Waiting. It always waits. Every few years it powers up again. Lights flash, doors open. It hums like it's dreaming, but it never speaks." "And what's inside?" she asked. Miguel hesitated. "I've never dared to enter." The weight of his words pressed on us. I stepped closer. The humming grew louder. A faint vibration crawled through the soles of my boots. There was a hatch on the side, barely visible, a seam where the material split. It had no handle, no keypad, no switch. Then, without warning, it opened. A soft hiss, like breath escaping. A ramp extended slowly to the ground, revealing a dark corridor inside, lined with soft white light. The air smelled like ozone and something else, sorrow, somehow distilled into scent. Miguel backed away. "This is new. It's never done that before," Anna whispered. "It's waiting for you." "No," he said. "It's waiting for one of you." Silence swallowed us. I didn't know why, but my body moved on its own. I stepped onto the ramp. The air changed, denser, charged. The inside was larger than it should have been. The corridor stretched into infinity, curving slightly as if built on a loop. Behind me, Anna called out, "Don't go alone," but I had to. Some part of me knew this was the only way to find the truth. About the passengers, the plane, the project, and maybe even myself. I stepped inside, the door closed, darkness, then light, and a voice, not human, not machine, spoke in my mind. "You have entered the record of Flight 913. Please select your memory." The voice wasn't heard so much as felt, pressing against the inside of my skull like heat in a closed room. It had no accent, no tone, no emotion, just presence. When it asked me to select a memory, it wasn't metaphorical. The corridor I stood in shimmered, and before me, like transparent film projected into the air, appeared dozens, no, hundreds, of flickering moments. They weren't mine, not entirely. One showed the original boarding of Flight 913, families filing onto the aircraft, laughing, distracted by boarding passes and carry-ons. Another showed the same boarding scene, but something was wrong. The airline uniforms were different, a darker green, and a military officer stood at the jet bridge with a clipboard. In another, the plane never took off. It exploded on the tarmac in a plume of impossible blue fire. And in yet another, the passengers were different altogether. Same plane, different timeline, different destiny. Each of these scenes was wrapped in a thick emotional aura, some peaceful, others horrifying. I walked between them like one might walk through memories at the edge of sleep. The corridor wasn't fixed. It shifted, reshaped itself with each step I took. I felt my heartbeat rising, my breath quickening. The vessel was letting me see versions of the same event, each slightly altered, fractured by decisions, by probabilities, by something outside my comprehension. And then I saw him, Miguel. He was young again, sitting in the cockpit, his hands on the controls, brow furrowed. The co-pilot beside him wore sunglasses, even in the dim light. The two spoke softly, almost nervously. I leaned closer, and the memory opened like a wound. I was no longer in the corridor. I was inside the cockpit, watching, listening. "Are you sure this is the right route?" the co-pilot asked. "I'm following protocol," Miguel said. "Coordinates came directly from command. But these aren't civilian airways. I've flown this path in the military. There's no station out here, just jungle." Miguel didn't answer. He tapped the altimeter, then the weather radar. Both flickered. "I don't like this," the co-pilot muttered. Then came the signal, a crackle on the comms, like distant thunder and static. Then a voice in Portuguese, but strangely garbled, repeated, "Maintain course, do not deviate, altitude override authorized." That's when the cockpit began to shake. I pulled back from the memory, heart racing, my fingers were trembling. The corridor blinked back into existence, and with it, another memory appeared. This time, not a vision of the past, but of the present. Anna. She was outside the vessel, pacing, worried. Miguel stood at the base of the hangar, watching the sky, eyes wide. Something above them shimmered, an invisible ripple. The sky bent, ever so slightly, like heat over asphalt. I tried to speak, to reach them, but my voice dissolved into the silence of the corridor. The vessel wasn't showing me scenes, it was showing me versions of reality. And worse, there was no guarantee I'd return to the one I came from. Suddenly, the light changed. The corridor darkened, bathed in deep amber. The walls vibrated. I felt pressure behind my eyes. Then, as if pulled by gravity, I was dragged into another memory. But this one was mine. I was back in the hotel in Rio, the night the page went missing. Only this time, I caught the intruder. A man dressed in black, his face hidden, flipping through Miguel's diary. I lunged at him. We struggled. The page tore. I held a piece, just large enough to read a sentence before he escaped. "The plane is no longer a machine. It is a witness." The phrase echoed in my head as the corridor twisted again. Then came the final scene. The passengers. I saw all 28. They were not ghosts. They were alive, frozen mid-step inside the vessel, some seated, others standing, their faces calm, eyes closed, as if asleep, as if waiting. Each wore a faint glow around their bodies, pulsating like the hull itself. Miguel had written that none of them returned. He was wrong. They never left. They had become part of the vessel. Not dead. Not alive. Integrated. And then the voice returned. This is your decision point. Memory or extraction. What does that mean? I asked aloud, though I knew the vessel didn't need words to understand me. Remain and be preserved. Or return with incomplete comprehension. Will I die if I stay? Not as you understand it. Will I forget if I leave? Not entirely. I stood in silence. Around me, the corridor pulsed. The passengers floated in stillness. The vessel, this living, ancient, sentient thing, had offered me what it had once offered Miguel, a choice. He ran. I wasn't sure I wanted to. Then one of the passengers opened her eyes. It was a girl, perhaps 8 years old, who had written in Miguel's diary in crayon. Her lips didn't move, but I heard her in my mind. Help us leave. A flash of light, and I was back in the hangar. Anna screamed, running to me. I collapsed. My mouth tasted of metal. My skin was slick with sweat. Miguel stood over me, stunned. It opened for you, he whispered. Anna knelt beside me, gripping my hand. Are you okay? What did you see? I turned to Miguel. They're still in there? His face drained of color. They're alive, I said. Somehow, the passengers, the crew, they're waiting. They're trapped. Miguel backed away. Then it's not over. No, I said. It's just beginning. Outside, the sky rippled again, and this time something was coming through. The ripple in the sky widened, a silent distortion like light passing through water, folding and reforming in a way that didn't obey physics. The air around us turned still, almost heavy, as if holding its breath. The birds that had been chirping moments before had gone silent. Even the wind paused. It wasn't just a visual phenomenon. It had weight, presence, intelligence. Miguel stepped back into the shadows of the hangar. His hands trembled. No, he whispered. Not again. Anna and I followed his gaze upward. The distortion began to pulse in sync with the humming of the vessel behind us. I could feel it in my chest, an unnatural rhythm, like a heartbeat trying to synchronize with something ancient and alien. Then, without warning, a sound split the sky. Not thunder, not mechanical. It was like a choir in reverse, notes collapsing inward, voices unforming. And through the distortion, something began to descend. At first I thought it was a second vessel, but it was them, the passengers. Not physical, at least not in the way flesh and bone should appear, but silhouettes of the 28 souls aboard Flight 913, now suspended in the air above us, translucent, vibrating with faint light. Their forms shimmered as if torn between dimensions, flickering between presence and absence. They hovered in silence, faces neutral, expressions unreadable. Anna clutched my arm. Are they free? I don't know, I answered. Maybe this is how they reach out. Miguel dropped to his knees, his eyes welled with tears, but not from awe, from guilt. I told them I would bring the truth, but I buried myself instead. I ran from it. One of the figures slowly descended toward him. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, his face clearer now. The co-pilot, Mendonça. His eyes, though faintly glowing, locked onto Miguel's. Then he spoke, but not aloud. His voice arrived inside our minds like a memory, familiar yet distant. You were never meant to survive, but you did, because they needed a witness. Miguel bowed his head. I failed you. No, Mendonça said. You waited. Now they know. Anna stepped forward. Who are they? What is this plane? What's inside it? All 28 forms turned toward her in unison. The Echo was not designed to transport bodies, said Mendonça. It was meant to preserve timelines. Each of us is a memory locked in recursion. The vessel is an archive. I felt cold run up my spine. So, you're not people anymore, I asked. We are everything we once were, said a young woman floating near Anna, but unbound from consequence. We remember every version. Miguel stood slowly. Why now? Why appear to us? Because you entered the Echo, Mendonça replied. You activated the recall. It is rare that someone survives the interface with knowledge intact. I looked back at the vessel. And the ripples. The sky? The boundary is weakening, Mendonça said. Your world and ours are intersecting again. A collapse is coming, one that cannot be hidden. Miguel stepped forward. What do you want from us? Tell them, the child's voice came again, the girl from the diary. Tell them the truth, not just of the crash, but of the choice. What choice? The sky pulsed again. The figures flickered. The distortion trembled. Mendonça's voice darkened. In the next cycle, the vessel will seek to replicate, to continue. It will call others, pilots, passengers, governments. If they do not understand what it carries, they will try to use it. Anna's eyes widened. As a weapon? Yes, the voice said. Or worse, a cure. I remembered Lucas's words. They're no longer in control. And now I understood. The vessel, the Echo, was not a tool. It was a seed, planted by something beyond time, capable of rewriting reality through memory and possibility. Flight 913 was only the first test, the passengers, the data. And now it had opened again to select the next witness, me. The silhouettes began to fade, one by one, like embers in wind. But before Mendonça vanished, he left one final thought in my mind. You must decide what version of the truth the world is ready for. Then they were gone. The sky snapped back into stillness. The pulse stopped. The air warmed, and the forest resumed. Quiet chirps, distant rustles, the illusion of normality returning like a curtain drawn over a stage. Miguel turned to me. You understand now, don't you? I nodded. I don't know what to do with it. You don't have to, Anna said. Not yet. But we need to leave. We hiked back to the helicopter. Silent. Geraldo looked at us nervously but said nothing as we took off. From above, the jungle looked undisturbed, untouched by the impossible revelation we had just witnessed. Back in Rio, we parted ways with Miguel. He disappeared again, this time by choice. I didn't ask where he would go. I already knew he would wait for the Echo's next cycle. Anna and I returned to the city with copies of the diary, footage from the hangar, and audio recordings of the encounter. We debated what to do, leak it online, contact journalists, write a book. But then Anna said something that froze me. What if we just became the next carriers? What do you mean? The vessel showed you the passengers, the timelines, the possibilities. What if it also implanted something else? A message we haven't uncovered yet? A trigger? I couldn't answer. That night, I dreamed of Flight 913, boarding again. Every face I passed was mine. I woke in the middle of the night, covered in sweat, my pulse hammering in my throat like I had just run miles. The room was dark, but the dream had been too vivid to ignore. I had walked through the fuselage of Flight 913 again, but this time I was both passenger and pilot, my hands strapped to the controls, my face reflected in every window, my breath echoing through the vessel as if I was the only living thing aboard. And yet I could feel them, the passengers, not present, but watching, remembering. I stumbled into the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. My reflection stared back, and for a moment, just one terrible instant, it wasn't mine. The face looking back had hollow eyes, aged skin, and a faint glow beneath the surface of its cheeks, as if something else pulsed just under the flesh. I blinked, and it was gone. My mind, I told myself, was fraying under the weight of all I'd seen. By morning, Anna was already awake. She had printed a series of symbols she'd pulled from the Echo's interior. Not markings in the traditional sense, more like patterns embedded in the metal, like veins beneath translucent skin. At first glance, they seemed random, but laid out across the table, they revealed a form, a structure, a sequence. I think it's code, she said. Not just a language, a sequence of instructions, but not for humans. For the vessel, I asked, or for whatever built it. Her eyes were rimmed with sleeplessness, her hands shaking as she traced the lines. "There's a rhythm to it," she whispered, "like breathing or like a countdown." I stared at the pattern. A loop. A cycle. "Do you think it's starting again?" She didn't answer. Instead, she pointed to a section of the diagram where the shapes coalesced into a figure 8, a symbol of infinity. "This section only appears when the vessel is awake," she said. "It's like a fail-safe, a recursive warning, a loop, a warning to itself." The Echo wasn't just a storage unit for alternate memories. It was intelligent. It remembered its own cycles. Each activation brought with it a new wave of witnesses, survivors, carriers, and now we were part of that system. Later that day, we received a package, unmarked, no return address. Inside was a cassette tape and a note written on a torn piece of airline napkin. "You've entered the archive. Now listen." We didn't own a tape player. Few did anymore. But an old journalist friend of mine, Raphael, kept one in his office for nostalgia. We drove across town, the package clutched tight in my hands. Raphael raised an eyebrow when he saw the tape. "Where'd you find this?" "Looks like something from the 70s. We didn't explain. He plugged it into the deck, pressed play. Static. Then a voice. Faint. Distant. Cracked. It was Miguel. Not the Miguel we had met in the jungle, but a younger version. Fresher, more coherent. "They're trying again," he said. "But the timeline is unstable. If you're hearing this, you're inside the 7th cycle. The loop is closing. The vessel doesn't forget, and soon neither will you." A pause, breathing. "They made me choose," he said, "to stay inside or return incomplete. I chose to run. I left something behind, in the cabin, row 9, seat B. It's the only thing that doesn't loop." The tape clicked, stopped, silence. Row 9, seat B. My mind went into overdrive. Miguel had hidden something physical, something that existed across versions, a fixed point, a seed outside the loop. Anna had already pulled out our photos of the Echo's interior. We scanned through them until we found it. Row 9, seat B, empty. But underneath it, something metallic, shaped like a coin. We zoomed in. It was etched with the same infinity symbol we had seen in the code. A key, a lock, neither of us knew, but we did know where we had to go. Back to the Echo. The decision wasn't made lightly. Geraldo, our pilot, refused to fly near the hangar again. Said it felt wrong, like something heavy pulled at the air itself. So we found another way. A small boat that could follow the river upstream, then hike the rest. 3 days through jungle. No guarantees we'd find the vessel still there. But it was, just as we left it, still humming, still pulsing, still waiting. We approached with caution. The hatch had closed, the lights were off. But as I stepped closer, my presence seemed to activate it. The seam along the side glowed faintly, and the ramp extended once more just as it had before. Anna stayed behind this time. She handed me a handheld recorder, eyes fixed on the dark entrance. "If you find it, bring it back, no matter what happens." I nodded and stepped inside. The corridor lit instantly, the same rhythm, the same pulsing breath. I moved toward row 9, seat B. It looked ordinary. Fabric faded, armrest cracked. But when I reached underneath, my fingers touched cold metal. I pulled it out. A medallion, heavier than it looked, etched with the symbol, and something else, writing in a language I didn't recognize, and yet I understood. It said, "Do not return." But I had already come too far. Behind me, the door sealed shut. Ahead of me, the corridor dissolved, and then the vessel spoke again. "Timeline accepted, preservation complete, beginning extraction." The lights went red. My body froze, and the medallion began to burn in my hand. The pain was instantaneous. The medallion seared into the center of my palm, branding the flesh as if it had been heated in fire. I screamed, but no sound came out. The vessel didn't allow it. Not here, not in this place between what was and what would be. The walls rippled outward like liquid glass, folding over one another in slow motion, and I felt the corridor slip away beneath my feet. There was no floor now, no gravity, no orientation, just motion. I was falling without speed, floating without direction, every part of my body being pulled into itself like I was being unraveled strand by strand. Then the voice returned, not as words, but impressions burned into thought. You hold the anomaly, the persistent artifact, the breach key. I tried to think back to form a question, but my thoughts tangled like roots. Still, the meaning came through. The medallion was never part of the Echo's original structure. It was introduced by Miguel, or someone else who had touched the vessel long ago, and had survived every cycle since. It was immune to the loops, a constant. I felt the burn spread up my arm. Not pain anymore, but something deeper, emerging. My vision fractured. Flashes of memory, some mine, some not. I saw Miguel as a young boy, holding a model airplane, crying as his father shouted in another room. I saw Anna, years before we met, standing alone in a library basement, weeping over a document stamped classified. I saw the girl from the cabin, row 7, seat A, drawing a sun in red crayon on the back of a boarding pass, unaware it would become her last message to the world. Then I saw versions of myself. Too many. In one, I boarded Flight 913 as a journalist, investigating its disappearance. In another, I died in a car crash before the investigation ever began. In yet another, I never existed at all. The Echo was showing me that I had always been part of the cycle. We all were. Passengers, witnesses, carriers. The medallion throbbed in my hand, its surface now glowing with unfamiliar geometry, symbols that rearranged themselves in real time, responding to my presence. Then the voice spoke again. Do you wish to preserve or release? The question wasn't abstract. I could feel it now. The Echo wasn't a prison. It was a vault. A containment unit for realities that diverged too far, that threatened the equilibrium of the world we understood. Each passenger wasn't a victim, they were a variable. Each memory wasn't just a story, it was a fissure, and the vessel's job was to store, protect, and when necessary, reset. Miguel's sin wasn't survival, it was deviation. He had carried knowledge across the boundary that wasn't meant to be known, let alone shared. His diary, the medallion, the memory he left behind, all were leaks in the integrity of the loop. And now the Echo had offered me the same choice, to preserve what I had seen, to hold it in stasis, or to release it. Release means fragmentation, the voice said. Your identity may collapse. I didn't care. I had seen the faces of the lost. I had felt their memories, their pain, and I knew the loop had to end. Not just for them, but for the world that was being rewritten without consent. I closed my fist around the medallion and said the only word I could form. Yes. The vessel shuddered. Every wall lit up with symbols, each one cascading like raindrops across a sheet of glass. A sound followed, something I can only describe as a universe taking a breath. The floor reformed, my body slammed downward. The door at the end of the corridor cracked open. I stumbled through it, back into the hangar. Anna was there, so was Miguel. But they weren't the same. Miguel's eyes widened the second he saw me. You released it." Anna backed away. "What did you do? What happened in there?" "I saw everything," I said, "and I made it stop." But the hangar was no longer quiet. Outside, the jungle roared. Every bird, every insect, every living thing screaming at once. And the sky had changed. Above the hangar, a second sun now hovered, low on the horizon, casting no heat, but a pulsing golden light that flickered with each heartbeat in my chest. It wasn't a star. It was a reflection of the vessel, of the loop, of the past now freed. Miguel dropped to his knees, gripping his head. "You broke containment, you fool. You let it all out." I turned to Anna. "We need to go." "No," she said, trembling. "We need to tell them." Then the ground shook, not violently but rhythmically, like the footsteps of something enormous approaching from the forest. Leaves trembled, vines pulled taut, and the echo behind us opened again. But this time, no one stepped out. Instead, we heard the voice once more, spoken through every tree, every bird, every gust of wind. "The carrier has chosen release, commencing migration." Miguel looked up, eyes wide. "It's not done." "No," I said. "It never will be." Because now, the vessel wasn't bound to the hangar. It was waking up everywhere. And the truth of Flight 913 was no longer hidden. It was multiplying. We ran. The jungle around us vibrated with an energy that felt both familiar and utterly alien. Leaves shimmered in hues I couldn't name. The soil beneath our feet cracked with a pulse that mimicked the medallion still fused into my palm. The second sun hung low in the sky, casting no shadow, warping every angle it touched. Gravity faltered in bursts. Miguel stumbled beside us, muttering fragments of old flight instructions, as if trying to ground himself in a reality that no longer obeyed the laws he once understood. The hangar collapsed behind us, not violently, but deliberately, folding inward like paper into a perfect spiral before vanishing into a vacuum of light. The echo had migrated, or perhaps it had simply shed its shell. The jungle now pulsed with its memory, its intelligence stretched across every leaf and root. We reached the river, breathless and shaking. Our boat was still there, but the water had changed. No longer muddy and brown, it now reflected the sky in impossible detail, like a mirror turned upside down. When I dipped my hand in, the ripples moved slower than they should have, refracting not light but moments. I saw Anna's face, a version of it, older, crying in front of a television screen. I saw myself, writing in a room filled with books in a language I hadn't learned yet. And then the ripples stilled. Sana climbed aboard. So did Miguel. I hesitated. "You saw what's coming," Miguel said, his voice flat. "You know we won't reach the world we left behind." "I know," I replied. "But maybe that's not what matters now." We sailed for 2 days. The jungle remained oddly still. No predators, no sounds beyond our boat and the lapping of time-twisted water. The sun, both of them, hung at opposite ends of the sky, like parentheses enclosing a sentence too ancient to read. We didn't speak much. Anna documented what she could, her handwriting becoming increasingly distorted, as if language itself couldn't keep up. Miguel stared into space, whispering apologies to passengers whose names he repeated like a rosary. When we reached the edge of the forest, we found the village we had passed days ago. It was empty, not destroyed, just uninhabited. Bowls of food on tables, radios playing static. A newspaper dated 1975 pinned to a wall, though it was freshly printed. The loop had expanded, and so had the echo's reach. We moved on. Back in Rio, nothing was the same. The streets were familiar, but the people were wrong. Or maybe we were. Faces seemed slightly off. Voices carried tones that didn't match their age. Buildings we remembered were in different locations. Time itself had wrinkled. We turned on a television. A breaking news broadcast aired footage of an unidentified aerial object hovering over the Brazilian airspace, pulsing with rhythmic intervals, as the newscaster described it. Then the feed cut. A message replaced it. Not from any government. From the vessel. A white screen, black text. Cycle 0 initiated. Miguel collapsed. Anna screamed, and I understood. This wasn't a reset. It was a cleanse. Every version, every preserved passenger, every fractured timeline, now merging into one. The echo had catalogued enough. It was no longer observing. It was choosing. Humanity would not be told. It would be rewritten. We tried to warn people. We uploaded everything, the diary, the audio tapes, the photographs. But every time we did, the files would vanish, corrupted within hours. People forgot the moment they heard. Readers blinked and scrolled past, like the memories themselves were being rejected by the world. The truth was too big. It refused to be contained in a single reality. So I wrote, not to expose, not to save, but to remember. Because that's what the Echo feared most, not being known, but being understood. And now, if you're reading this, it means some fragment escaped. Some version of me succeeded in transmitting the memory. But I warn you, don't look for the wreckage. Don't chase the coordinates, don't touch the medallion, because once you enter the archive of Flight 913, it never lets you go.